Let's talk about those albums people pretend to hate. I recently did a video on albums people pretend to love, and now we're doing the opposite. We're doing the albums that people pretend to hate, which is a lot harder. It's a lot harder to come up with the albums for this one, but I feel like I've got a good juicy 5 for you guys. And just like the other video, I'm sure a lot of people hate these albums. You know, I'm sure a lot of people loved the other albums, and I'm sure a lot of people hate these albums, but there is a lot of also those kinds of people who hate it for a really dumb reason and they haven't given it a chance. So let's get started with my first pick, which is the reason I did this, because of a comment on the last video talking about a band called Manowar. Manowar, Manowar, living on the road, do-do-do-do-do-do. Manowar. Right, so let's talk about the anthology picture, because everyone's seen it, you know? Those tight pants, muscle, just oiled up muscle men with swords, it paints a very vivid picture, you know? The word being cringe. Now, a lot of people hate Manowar for stuff like this, you know? Overly masculine, just over the top, Dungeons and Dragons like, just all singing about metal this and metal that, and it gets a bit too smelly cheese. But have they listened to the albums? These people who hate Manowar, and this is a cheating one because I'm saying every single album by Manowar, have they listened to the albums? I don't think they have. Because if they have, they'd understand that the guitar work is fucking phenomenal. The singing is absolutely insane. If you like stuff like Dio, you know, you look Iron Maiden, there's no reason to not like Manowar. You like Saxon? You should like Manowar. It's pure heavy metal. You know, battle hymns, go listen to battle hymns. Absolute majestic. Hail to England. And I know there's a big, muscly, naked guy on the cover holding a Great Britain flag. Based. But listen to the music. The music is fantastic. So many good songs. Blow Your Speakers, Rock and Roll. Great kind of Kiss-like song. I love that. You know, Kings of the World. That album is just furious. So many good. Born of Black, Wind, Fire and Steel. Just go listen to that one. Black Wind, Fire and Steel is just like a speedy metal anthem. Defender. There's so many great Manowar songs. People pass off the whole band as this cheesy, masculine nothingness. But it isn't. It's got lots of substance, and the metal adds to the magic. You know? Them singing about how proud they are to be metal. It's great. It works. You just have to kind of sit back and let the music absorb into you, and I think you'll enjoy it. So I really like Manowar, and I too was kind of like some people. I thought, maybe it is a bit cheeky, maybe it's a bit, not cheeky, well that's not the right word, cheesy, but then when you go and sit down and listen to every single album, it's not. It's just pure heavy metal goodness, and one of the best heavy metal bands around. Because other bands play, Manowar kills. So Wimps and Posers leave the hall. So Manowar is my first pick, and that's every single fucking album. I'm mainly going to show Anthology because that is the picture that people just like to throw up. It's like the greatest hits kind of thing. But the songs themselves, pretty damn good. My next pick is going to be Sepultura's Roots. Now, a lot of people hate this because the main reason is that the style change. KSAD has kind of a tribal edge to it, but it's still rooted in death metal, whereas Roots is a lot more of a new metal kind of sound, and that puts loads of people off. So there is a lot of people who didn't like the sound change, and they were fans of Sepultura back in the day, and that makes sense. They didn't like it. You know, maybe they don't like KSAD as well. I'm not super big into KSAD or Roots, but listening to them, they're fine. They're totally fine. I don't understand the hate, because the songs themselves are actually pretty good. Attitude, that's a banging song. You know, Roots Bloody Roots is an anthem, and that gets stuck in my head more than any other Sepultura song. It just does. Earworms, Ratamahata is the most fun video ever. You know, and they're singing it along. You have to be in a certain mood for it. But people hate it just because of the style change, because of the sound change. And then online it's been like, worst albums by bands, or most disappointing albums by bands, and Roots is always on there. And I'm scratching my head and I'm thinking, like, there's worse Sepultura albums than Roots. You know, Against, I think, is way worse. There's a lot worse Sepultura albums, but people just pass it off just because of the sound change. And the Cavalera brothers are still on this album. There's still great riffs. In fact, it's more catchy, this album, than a lot of the previous ones. I'm not saying it's better. I'm more of a fan of Beneath the Remains. That's my go-to. It's like a darker, thrash album. I really enjoy that one. And Schizophrenia, pretty damn sexy. But, yeah, there's a lot of hate for Roots, and I feel like it's unwarranted. Yeah, the sound changed, but it's still a good album. You know? I don't think it warrants the hate. And a lot of people hate it just because other people hate it. They don't sit down and listen to it. But hey, if you don't like that style of music, then feel free to hate. It's all good. It's all good. Next up, what have I got down here? Oh yeah, a big one. Metallica's Black Album. That is right. People hate Metallica's Black Album for a similar kind of reasoning. The sound change from And Justice for All to the Black Album. There's a lot less emphasis on, thrash, first of all. It's a lot less underground, I guess the word is, but still, And Justice for All was kind of seeping that in with some of the songs as well. Harvest of Sorrow, just things like that. But the Black Album kind of knocked it up a notch to a more mainstream degree, and it's the album that made them popular. It's the album that broke them through to the mainstream, and people hate it for it. People say it's a shit album because it's mainstream. People say it's shit because it's so popular. No. You have to have better reasonings than that. Just because something's popular doesn't mean it's bad. You know, Of Wolf and Man is catchy as fuck. Through the Never is catchy as fuck. You know, Enter Sandman, even though it's overplayed, is catchy as fuck. You all know the melody in your head. You've all heard it 100 times. It's overplayed. Does that mean bad? Does overplayed mean bad? I don't think so. I don't think it does. So, the Black Album, I feel like is overhated. I feel like people pretend to hate it because they're supposed to. Because Metallica was more metal back in the day, and that is correct, you know? Ride the Lightning is my favourite album. Kill 'Em All's probably second. So, you know, I like the more metal version of Metallica, but I'm not going to hate on the Black Album just because it's popular. Because that's what I feel like a lot of people do. They're hating on it because it's popular. It's a cool thing to hate on the popular thing, and it's cool to hate on the most popular Metallica album. And I don't see that. I think it's a good album. I think it's fun, and people like to hate on it for no fucking reason. Now, that being said, if you don't like the more accessible style of music they're playing, then sure, yeah, hate it all you want. Same with all these albums. I like people that know what they want and hate what they hate, but don't do it for a stupid reason because it's popular or mainstream. Don't do it for that. So people who hate it because it's popular, they're pretending to hate it. Next up, we have, Carcass's Swan song. That's right, Carcass. You know, they went from a more gore-grindy style, Recapitulation, into the more death metal style and Necroticism, which I love. Necroticism is a fantastic album. Then into the more mellow death, which I almost put here. I almost put Heartwork here. But I don't see as much hate with that. I see it sometimes, and I don't understand it as well. But then Swan Song comes out, and it brings the death metal to a more death, doomy, groovy kind of sound. And a lot of people, again, don't like the sound change. And that's fair enough. You know, you hate it for that. You don't gel with the sound. That's fine. But some people hate it, again, because it's not the same. You know, it's not the same. You're trying to compare it with the earlier stuff. Fair enough. But listen to it on its own. It's actually quite a solid album. You know? Hating it just because it's not what you wanted it to be, that never makes sense to me. It never makes sense. Listen to it of its own accord and give the rating of its own accord. And I think it's a pretty good, groovy, you know, mid-paced death metal album. I think it's pretty good. Obviously, it's not going to rise to the heights of Necroticism, but it's still a pretty fine album, and I feel like people pretend to hate on it, and they don't really listen to it. And they just kind of listen to it with the context of everything around it and not in a vacuum. You should listen to it in a vacuum and judge it based on its own merits. That's why I feel like every album should be judged as. Like the Black Album, view it as an album, judge it by itself. I know it's hard to do that because bands have discographies and you've got to compare them and contrast them, especially if you're doing an album ranking. I can understand on that sense, but a review? Nah, fuck off. Listen to it as itself. So yeah, Swan Song by Carcass. And last but not least, Behemoth's I Loved You at Your Darkest. Okay. I thought this was a pretty good album when it came out. You know, I still think it's a pretty good album. Obviously, it's nothing compared to Demigod. It's nothing compared to Evangelion, The Satanist. Now, people pretend to hate this one because it's The Satanist Part 2. And I can kind of understand it, because it's rehashing the same thing they did on the previous album. But at the same time, we look at it in a vacuum. Some of these songs are fucking banging. You know, Bartzabel's been stuck in my head ever since it got released. That's such a catchy song. But then it has some other really ferocious songs on here. Wolves of Siberia, one of my favourite Behemoth songs, and it's short, like 3 minutes long. Fast, energetic, great live. I think the album is pretty good. I feel like people pretend to hate it just because it's The Satanist Part 2. Just because they wanted something fresh and unique. And yeah, they got that with The Satanist, but they got it again with I Loved You at Your Darkest, and it's a bit of a step down, okay. But hated? Like, is it hateable because of that? You know, it's more of the same. That should be good, right? More of the same is good. Cannibal Corpse has been doing that since fucking the very first album. Or maybe the second album, because the first one's pretty different. The first one's more of a thrash album. But yeah, loads of bands have been, like, doing that. Overkill, you know? More of the same bad, and this is only the second more of the same. When they released the album after this, which was, again, third of more of the same, it got a bit stale. But, like I said in the previous albums, listen to them in vacuum. Their albums are actually pretty good. So I feel like people pretend to hate I Love You at Your Darkest just because The Satanist was so monumental. You know, the style change in The Satanist was so monumental that people kind of wanted that again. They wanted to have another monumental release, but instead it was just more of the same. So I can understand lazy comparisons, and I could understand it just being kind of flat, but hating it, there's some great songs on there. So that is my 5 albums people pretend to hate. And again, feel free to hate all these albums. I know some of you in the comments will hate all these albums, but that's just opinions. You know, that's just opinions, and it's just a bit of fun. But those are 5 albums I feel like people pretend to hate for one reason or another. Let me know down in the comments below albums you feel like people pretend to hate but secretly quite enjoy. Let me know down below, and we'll see you again on another Quest for Metal.